Hello everyone. Just finished painting these 21 figures. They are Masai from Wargames Foundry. Had them unpainted for a very long time. I did paint up quite a few Masai figures about a year to year and a half ago, and these were kind of outstanding at the time. Never got round to them. Partly because I got a bit sort of burnt out painting Maasai, partly because I didn't have enough weapons for them, so I've just recently had to purchase some more weapons, and partly because there are three kind of main variants in the Wargames Foundry range. Some have the ostrich feather kind of frame around their face, which is the kind of classic Maasai appearance. Some have a variety of headgear, which is mainly kind of braided hair and beaded ornaments, and then some have the lion's mane headdress, which is what these are. Now, I did paint some of the lion's mane headdress figures before, but of the three choices, the lion's mane was kind of my least favourite. I mean, not to say that they're not nice, but they were the ones I kind of put to the back of the queue. And as I say, because I didn't have enough weapons at the time, I sort of dried up a little bit and never got round to them. But I wanted to get back into painting some Darkest Africa stroke Congo figures, so I thought I'd make a start with these. Yeah, the reason I didn't have enough weapons was that my collection of Masai figures kind of stems from two different sources, really. One was that just recently I put up a video about an abandoned colonial era project, and I showed you my Italian colonial army. But amongst the ranks of the Ethiopian army that was matched against the Italians were reputed to have been some pagan savages. Now the Ethiopian army was a Christian army, but there are these accounts of very kind of brutal pagan warriors in the Ethiopian army's ranks, and they were almost certainly Maasai. Because I'll talk about this in a little bit later, but they were almost certainly Maasai. So I bought quite a lot of Maasai figures to incorporate into my Ethiopian army, and then obviously, as I've explained in the previous video, never got round to finishing that project. So I had a lot from that. And then the other source was I bought some years ago now at the Plymouth War Game Show this enormous bag of unpainted miniatures, just random assortment of miniatures, all having a kind of colonial theme to them. And over the course of the years, I've used now virtually all that bag. It had Zulus in it. It had these Masai. It had lots of other things that I found suitable for Congo, like African explorers, that kind of thing. It's got some Boer War figures in there that I still haven't got around to painting, and some British redcoats from the Anglo-Zulu War. Had some French Foreign Legion even in there. A real kind of mix of figures, but I've, as I say, over the years, that is the best purchase I've ever made. From a sort of second-hand item from a war game show. It's been such a useful resource to me, that bag. But not a lot of weapons and so on in there, which is why I didn't have enough weapons to match the figures. So I purchased a few more from War Games Foundry recently, as I say. And the reason I'm showing, what I'm going to do in a minute is I'm going to mix these in with my complete collection and show you the army, give you an overview of it as a whole, and talk a little bit more about Maasai and wargaming rules and so on. But I wanted to show you these separately, partly just to show you what I've done recently, but also to show you how what an outstanding range of figures really these Masai are from Walgins Foundry. That they're sculpted by Andy Copplestone, and amongst these 21 figures, there are 7 variants of figure pose and dress style. So, in other words, there are 3 of each variant, and when you consider that, as well as the lion's mane headdress, they also have those other 2 types of head that I was telling you about a moment ago. That is an amazing kind of amount of permutations of pose and dress and so on. So you can really throw a good, you can get the army looking very kind of disparate and interesting, I think. So, and on top of that, I mean, just brilliant castings. I mean, most of them, as you can probably see, are naked, but they all have different accoutrements about them. But Andy Copplestone's managed to kind of capture the kind of slimness and elegance of the Maasai tribe. I mean, they stem from the kind of North Africa originally. They're what's known as a sort of Nilotic race of people, rather than the natives further south in Africa who tended to have migrated there from the western side of Africa, or have been of longer standing on the sort of southern tip of Africa. So they have a very different appearance. But Andy Copplestone has really captured, I think, that kind of aesthetic of the Maasai warrior. So I've really enjoyed painting these up. But anyway, what I'm going to do, as I say, is mix them in now with the rest of my army and give you a bit more of an overview. So it'll take me a little while to set up a new kind of table for that, I think. Right then, so this is the assembled army. The bad news is I've just counted it all up. You would have seen all of these figures in one video or another in the past, and I thought I had a few more, I must admit. The bad news is I've counted them all up, and I've got 58 of the main figure type, which is either with the ostrich feather frame headdress, or the lion's mane headdress, or the braided hair decorated with beads type of hair style, and that comes to 58, which is a lot, but it's not enough to play a game of the men who would be kings. So for the time being, I'm going to have to confine myself to Congo, which is fine, because that's the reason I originally started painting these figures, was to use them in the game of Congo. But yeah, I need 112 figures. Tribal infantry units in the Men Who Would Be Kings are 16 figures per unit, and the army list that they suggest has got 7 units in it, which is 112 figures. So I'll get around to it one day. I've got to paint another 44. That's all it means, and they are fun to paint, so there's no great problem there. Just a matter of time, as always. Yeah, the thing about Congo is it is such a good game, and you would imagine that the Maasai are a perfect subject for a theme based on the African kingdoms sort of faction that they have in the book. There's a few problems with that, however. Where to start? I mean, right, one is that the Maasai don't really fall under that category of an African kingdom. They're a kind of pastoral society, and they're certainly based out on the savannah, so they are more likely to fall under the category of African kingdoms than forest tribes. But at the same time, they're not a kingdom. They have a kind of society where the hierarchy that is kind of the top of the hierarchy are elders. So decision making and authority is held by a group of elders rather than one central kingly character. So that kind of that makes them I know it's not a big issue, but it means you can't really add a character in such as the prince or the king. You have to use some of the other types of characters that the African kingdoms faction allows you to have. More than that, though, is that in the game of Congo, there are lots of different kind of troop types, and both the forest tribes and the African kingdoms allow you to incorporate troop types that have muskets, for instance, other more kind of sort of stereotypical kind of units like cannibals, that kind of thing, rugger, all those sort of things. And as well as not being, not fitting into that category of African kingdoms, I mean, the Masai are, they don't fall into that kind of typical stereotype. I mean, not that any tribe should do, really. It's just Congo is a very kind of pulp fiction kind of atmosphere to it, so it really does hark back to the kind of 1930s kind of sort of colonial representation, Tarzan, all that kind of thing, rather than trying to represent a true historic representation of an African force at that time. And the Maasai just don't gel with that. They were very conservative, never really adopted, or didn't adopt at all, as far as I know, the use of muskets or welcome kind of outside influence in any way. So if you are going to field a force in Congo and you're going to make it historically accurate, you're just going to have a very kind of homogenous force, maybe of young warriors and I forget what the categories are, but I think there's a married warrior type and that kind of thing. But you're not going to have the rugger bundukis and askaris and all this kind of thing, because the Maasai just weren't interested in, or not interested a lot in the outside world. They certainly weren't. They certainly didn't have any dealings with the European and Zanzibari kind of influences in that they didn't trade in slaves, so the Zanzibaris weren't able to trade with them, give them trade goods in return for slaves, and in fact the Zanzibaris had a very kind of difficult time with the Masai, who were very hostile towards them. So they don't fit into that either. They were a monotheistic society. They had a single god, albeit with a kind of dual personality, a benevolent and a hostile personality. So they don't really allow you to represent a witch doctor character. I'm just going to stop the camera a moment, zoom in a little bit so that you're not constantly looking at the same view. Yeah, there we go. Just wanted to zoom in a little bit on those couple of figures at the front there to explain what I mean. So you can't have a witch doctor because they didn't have those sort of although you could classify their beliefs as pagan in one respect, They didn't have this idea of spirits and ritual spells and all this kind of thing. So that makes it difficult for you to play a witch doctor character. I mean, the closest they had to a witch doctor would have been, I think it was called a Laden. It's like a sort of medicine man, an elder with healing abilities to kind of heal, and sort of shaman in a way. But he wouldn't have been garbed up with all those terrifying face masks and decorated with gruesome objects and so on. So there is a character in the War Games Foundry Masai characters pack, who is a kind of an elderly gentleman. So you could potentially use him as a witch doctor, but the spells and that kind of thing don't really suit the Maasai tribe, so it sort of jars a little bit, which is a shame, because using the witch doctor, it's a sort of an added fun element to the game of Congo. So it means you can't really play a witch doctor in the game of Congo. Luckily, in the supplement that came out, they did add 4 new characters, and they added the character of an elder. So I'm more inclined to use this figure as an elder than as a witch doctor. But as I say, it does mean you can't play that witch doctor card during the game. The one here, looking at the list of choices, I was thinking maybe I could use him as the war chief. So he would be suitable for that. So here's another character that you could play. And obviously this figure here is ideal to use as the Warhorn. So you've got 3 potential characters there that you could mix in, but I think you're always going to be a little bit handicapped if you do want to play a Maasai themed faction in Congo, because a lot of the success in the game revolves around being able to mix up the troop types and play the different kind of optional rules for muskets and rifles and witch doctors and all that kind of thing. So it is going to be a little bit limited, but never mind. Just going to change the camera focus again while I'm talking. Right, so the buildings at the back, by the way, are Grand Manor, and they are Maasai huts. It's the whole set is a kind of Maasai village, so ideal to fit in with this. Here you can see I've grouped together the warriors with ostrich feather frames around their faces, which are my favourites. Really kind of ferocious looking troop type, really intimidating. I was watching the other day the film, what was it called, The Ghost and the Darkness, which you may well be familiar with. It's a kind of very embellished account of a true story of some man-eating lions that hampered the construction of a railway bridge in Kenya at the beginning of the 20th century. But there's lots of embellishments in it, and one of them is that they introduce this American kind of hunter who comes along to help out eliminating these ferocious lions, and he brings with him a whole group of Maasai warriors to help him, and it's a very good portrayal of the sort of fear that they can invoke in people just by their kind of quivering, heavy breathing kind of silence. And it's worth watching the film for a lot of reasons. It's a really good film, even though, as I say, the story is highly embellished, but based on a true story. The lions are almost made to appear to be kind of sinister and deliberately cruel and carnivorous, and having all these weird sort of habits that make them almost devils. But in reality, it's probably the case that they were man-eaters because they were losing the ability to hunt their natural kind of prey. The skulls of the lions and their skins still exist. They're in the museum in Chicago, and one of them's been looked at sort of fairly recently, and it was discovered that he had a cavity under one of its teeth, which would have made it impossible for it to bite down on prey and bring it down. So it's probably why it began to kind of hunt and eat humans, because they were far easier kind of meat to obtain. Just move the camera again a little bit. There you can see some of the cattle that I painted up, and the other day when I was at the Plymouth show I managed to find some more cattle, so I've now got several more of those models, so I'm going to have quite a good set of cattle when I get those painted as well. What else to say? What was I going to say? It's going through my mind now. Yeah, so I think Congo is going to be the game that I use these for the foreseeable future, with the proviso that they aren't likely to win many of the scenarios. What I was thinking, someone, Grana Priego asked me whether I'd consider playing Congo solo, and it's really not the kind of game that you can, because it relies on choice of cards that you put in your hand, and I mean, one of the main things is the importance of not really knowing and anticipating what your opponent's got in his hand. But I did think that it might be worth painting up. I have got one lion, and I did think it might be interesting to paint up a few more lions, because I have got some unpainted in my lead mountain, and then to kind of try and create a solo scenario which would be a kind of lion hunt, because the mechanisms for wild animals in Congo work very well, and they're kind of independent of the players, and the lions in particular. So I might sort of invent a scenario, see how that goes, and if I get around to it, and I'll show you the results of that. In the middle there are a lot of the warriors with lion's mane headdress. So right at the front here are ones that I didn't show you a minute ago, but they're identical to the ones that I did show you earlier, which are at the back there. And yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say. Really good, nice looking army, despite the fact that it's undermanned, and I'm not going to be able to kind of win any games with it, but I really enjoyed painting these up, and I'll certainly paint some more in the future. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Bye for now.